mission is to build a future where no one needs to come out anymore. Together, we can create a world where everyone has the right to love, to succeed, to have a family, and to live a full, happy life. Our guest today is Fredrik Andreasson, and he is the CEO of Seattle Sperm Bank. I will invite him to tell us a little bit about himself and what is his role in this organization. Fredrik?
My name is Fredrik Andreasson. I run the operations at Seattle Sperm Bank. We are obviously based in Seattle, Washington, in the United States, and we have labs in Seattle and also in Phoenix, Arizona. We are a relatively small company with about 20 employees, but we do distribute our donors practically all over the world where the regulations allows us to do that. So we make huge impacts on people's lives in their efforts to create families.
That's so beautiful. It gives me chills. So for how long have you been with this organization, Fredrik?
I've been involved here since the beginning, which was about 11 years ago. We started in 2007. In a relatively small capacity, and then during the last 5 years I've been running the operations, trying to grow our domestic presence here in the United States and also reaching more families all over the world. So it's really a fun environment to work in. It mixes the scientific aspect of what we do, and it's like a regular small business, but it's also, and most importantly, we are really affecting people all over the world in their efforts to create happy, healthy families and allowing them to have babies in the best possible way when they're in this situation. So it's really a fun and rewarding environment to work in, and it's exciting to meet people from all over the world that have the same mission.
That sounds amazing. Do you mind explaining to us the terminology? I'm hearing you talking about donors. So who are the donors, who are the receivers, and how this transaction is happening? Or is it even the transaction the right word in here?
It is essentially a transaction where we are the middle.
Okay.
So, I mean, the beginning of the process, there's really two major aspects to it, and then a whole lot in between. But recruiting donors is probably the most difficult part of what we do here, because we are not looking for an average Joe to be a donor. We are really looking at the top of the criteria here, ranging from, of course, the sperm count and the fertility of that male, and also their character, their education, their genetics, their DNA, essentially. There's so many different levels that we screen out people. So recruiting donors is difficult. We approve less than 1% of the people that apply to our program to actually make it in.
Oh, wow.
Part of that is we select them. Part of it is based on the sperm quality. Some of them opt out themselves, so essentially disqualify because it's not for them. Mm-hmm. Because not only do you have to be a top character and have great fertility and sperm count, you also need to understand and be okay with all the implications that it means of being a sperm donor, where there will be children and families affected by your donation, and those children will, or at least will have the opportunity to contact the donor when they reach the age of 18. So it's a difficult process that we take great pride in, and there's no sense to recruit average people because they are not going to be very desirable, and there might be some regrets down the road. So it's certainly a challenge, but it's a rewarding challenge when it works out okay. So that's the first part.
Before we move to the second part, I just want to pause here for a minute and ask you, are there any regulations regarding how many babies get to be born for the same sample? And I'm asking that because a couple of months ago at the fertility conference in Australia where we met, I learned that 40 years ago, were not the regulation in place. Was pretty much the donor came into the clinic through the back door and the patient will came to the front door, and that transaction will happen right there, and then you end up with 30-40 babies from the same sample. So where are the numbers now? What kind of regulation do we have in place?
So it's very diverse. There's a huge range from the strictest each country can or does have their own regulations. So if we just start with Australia, which is a complex country of doing this, it depends on the state. So the limitations in each state in Australia differs on how many children or families, usually it's handled by families and not actually children, how many families can have a child from a donor. And it ranges from 5 worldwide in certain states, and it ranges to 10 in that state, but no worldwide limitation. So Australia is a good example of how different it can be. To expand on that into other countries, like the United States, there is no regulation at all on the number of offspring per donor.
Really?
There is a recommendation from the main organization here. It's called ASRM. They recommend no more than 25 children per metropolitan area, which is essentially 800,000 people. But if you do the quick math and take 300,000 people in the United States, divided by 800,000, and then multiply it by 25 families, sorry, I'm a math guy, so it turns out to thousands of babies. And obviously, anyone doesn't really think that that's okay. There are other countries that have no limitations at all. And then there's in Europe, many countries have the same maximum number of families. Like the UK has 10 families in the UK, but no other worldwide restrictions. So in essence, there is huge difference between countries.
I'll say.
What we do is that we self-select in the United States to do 25 families maximum per donor. With that said, few of our donors actually reach that number. So, and there's a lot more detail to it, but we sometimes offer a donor that has lesser offspring, will have lesser offspring because he was in the program for a short period of time, to be able to accommodate those people where they think it's the number one criteria to have the lowest number of families out there from the same donor. So there's a lot of controversy in this. People have very different opinions of what is healthy and acceptable, both for the donors, for the parents, for the children themselves. There's a lot that goes into it. So yeah, it's a big part of what we do.
Oh, wow. Do you mind going back a little bit and just clarify about the age when the child has the right to contact the donor? Is that optional? Is that specified into a contract?
So there's a lot of different terminology when it comes to that. We refer to our donors as open identity. And our policy with that is an open identity donor is someone who has given the consent to letting the children contact the donor once that child turns 18 of age. And it's an option to the child. There's no way around where the donor could potentially reach out to the children. That is completely confidential. We only allow open ID donors in our program. We've done that since the beginning because we think that's the right way to do it. If a parent chooses to use a sperm donor and he or she or they decide to choose an open ID, they can always have the option of not telling the child that they was conceived by a donor. But they can change their mind. But if you choose the other way around, which is called an anonymous donor, then that donor has not agreed to be contacted. And as much as the parents or the child would want, they don't have the legal right to contact them.
But yet there is ways to do so these days.
Whether or not they can track them down, that's a whole different story. There are certainly ways today with technology and DNA tracking in Ancestry.com and 23andMe and so forth, where you can do that. But it's not contractually an obligation for the donor to respond to such requests.
I see. Well, that is a very clear distinction here when it comes to donor. And let's move to the second part and learn about the receiver.
Sure.
Is it the receiver, patient, client? What is the right terminology? And who is this person?
Yeah, we go between the recipient or a patient. They're customers as well because they buy something from us. But I think using the word patient is pretty good. Even though they're not a patient of ours, they're a patient of a clinic or a doctor. Right. But let's just refer to them as patients for now. Then worldwide, to the countries that allow this, we work with different groups of patients. We work with different types of patients when it's directly to a clinic or directly to a patient. So if you just break down the groups that we generally work with, it's heterosexual couples, which is a relatively small, it's actually to most people a surprisingly small portion of our patients or customers. We work with single women by choice, which is a large group. Essentially, someone who does not have a husband or a Mr. Right, but they want to have a child on their own. Using a sperm donor is certainly one of the best options to go. And then we work with lesbian couples, and it's the same thing there. Is that if you're a lesbian couple and you want to have a child, using a sperm bank is definitely one of the best ways to go if you don't want to adopt. So those two ways is usually where most people go. And it's really the majority is single women and lesbian couples. It's a very small portion that is actual heterosexual couples, right, which surprises a lot of people who don't know exactly how this works.
I see. And that makes sense to me because a single mother by choice and lesbian couples, they basically are missing that biological part. While heterosexual couples, they might opt for a sperm bank because of a medical conditions.
Yes, absolutely. And even if the husband has fertility issues, there are generally ways where you can extract. You go through into an ICSI process. Gets a little bit more terminology here, but right, the ICSI, when you essentially insert one sperm into an egg, you can extract that from the male who has a very, very, very low sperm count. We're looking for 200 million in our donors, and the average sperm count is 25 million. You really just need one good one. The one good swimmer should do it. He doesn't even have to swim, or he or she doesn't even have to swim if you do ICSI. So because it's inserted directly into the egg. So I think that's why it's a backup plan for a lot of heterosexual couples. It's also a much more cost-effective plan, especially if you live in a country like the United States, where medical insurance generally does not cover fertility treatment. I say generally because there are those options somewhere. Right. But so that's the minority of our patients and customers is the heterosexual couples.
Okay. So financially speaking, what I'm hearing you saying is that it's less expensive to opt for a sperm bank than choosing to go through a IVF treatment. Is that correct?
Yes and no, depending on who we're talking about. So if we're talking about a heterosexual couple that is considering a sperm bank, that only happens in the event where the husband is unable to provide the woman with the sperm. So, and if you go through ICSI, or if you have absolutely nothing, if there's absolutely no happy swimmers in the male's body, then you have to go to a sperm bank. It's going to be less expensive to do an IUI insemination using a sperm donor than trying to go through ICSI with a husband's one sperm and trying to find that. It's a lot more risky too. But it really depends on the situation. In each case is unique.
Yes, and I really appreciate that distinction, as we are here to see different ways of how we can create a family. So just to recap, we have 3 big groups.
Yep.
Heterosexual couples, which are a little segment in this space, and the majority of recipients being single mother by choice and lesbian couples.
Correct.
Okay, so now that we know who is the donor and who is the recipient, please tell us about the process, how one knows that sperm bank is the right option for them, and how they select and choose the donor.
Yes, absolutely. So the two distinct groups there, they are essentially, when it comes to us, they generally deal with it similar, but they usually come to us from very different origins. A same-sex couple where two women, if you know about your sexual orientation early in life and you're in love with a woman, you want to have a baby with her, then you realize early on that, okay, I want to have a baby at 25 or 30, whatever it might be, and it's with this other woman. There are essentially 2 ways to go, and it's good ways to go. And it's either use a sperm donor, that way you get 50% of the DNA from one of the spouses, or you adopt the child, which is a wonderful gesture, and it's great, and it works out well. It's obviously difficult, and it's a lot of hoops you have to go through in order to achieve that. But with a sperm donor, generally, they don't have any major fertility issues. They're there because they're seeing us because they need a donor because they don't have access to sperm. Mm-hmm. They can choose to do home insemination, for example. In the United States, that's perfectly legal and fine. Some countries, it's not. So they don't have any fertility issues. They're both young and healthy. They just need the sperm, and they find us because they go online or they hear about us from it could be a same-sex organization. It could be any way to get to us. And then they select their donor by browsing our website. It's literally like a long catalog of fantastic donors. ranging from 18 to about 39 in age and all kinds of levels of education.
Is it like a dating website?
It's not too far from a dating website, but I would say it's a lot more sophisticated and a lot more. The biggest difference is that you have enormous amounts of medical history, which a dating site certainly wouldn't have.
Right.
It has a lot of confirmed accuracy of information. So background checks and medical, the transcripts of your college degree, etc. So I would say in general, it's far more accurate than what a dating site would be. I personally have never been on a dating site in my life, but I think I've seen some of them. But people try to put their best foot forward, and sometimes it takes a little bit about bending the truth in order to do so. So here it's far more serious because we're dealing with life.
Right. Well, I have been on a dating website once, and definitely the criteria of selections and filters are totally different than what you're saying. Of course, no medical history is presented, and now hearing how you screen your donors, it just gives me a different perspective of how little do we know about the medical history of our partners that we choose and marry with and have kids with.
Absolutely. We always say that you will certainly know more about your sperm donor than you would about your husband.
Right.
That's no joke. It's very true. I mean, you really have all of the above. So we offer photos of the donors when they are children themselves. So, we call it baby or childhood photos. So there's a number of those available on our website. There's also the general profile, which contains anything from their height, their weight, their build, their hair color, eye color, all of that information. And it also contains a lot of information about their medical history. If there's been any kind of medical history issues in their family, generally you don't see a lot of that. And people sometimes ask us, wow, you really have healthy donors. Well, it's like, yes, we do, because everyone else would be disqualified. If you have early stage of cancer or mental illnesses or anything like that, they would automatically be disqualified, and that's why I refer to only 1% of our applicants actually make it into the program. You also have an audio interview available for our donors.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Essentially a conversation with one of our staff members that is recorded, about 10 minutes long. It goes from very, very cheerful and kind of low profile, anything from their favorite food, their movies, their experiences, but also about their life goals, their backgrounds, a little bit more anything from emotional to a little bit deeper information. So some people really relate to people better by audio, and they can listen to their voice. They can see about their character, if they're funny, if they're serious, and all that.
Cool.
And then we also offer something that's called a Kiersey test. It's essentially a personality test where the donor answers a number of questions, and this is a report of if they're an introvert, extrovert, how they communicate, artistic, and all that. So
I love it.
Information is available to them, and it's challenging to go through over 200 donors and read all this, but there's very many filters where you can say, if my preferred criteria is ethnicity, that is the number one criteria for the most people. If you're a Caucasian couple, you might want to go with the Caucasian donor. Sometimes people want them to resemble a family member or a spouse. Then we do something called photo matching. So they will essentially send in a picture or two of the person they want to resemble. It could be their father, their brother, their spouse, themselves. And then we obviously we have live pictures of our donors, and we do that matching based on what the donors looks like. So there's a whole lot of filters that you can do to then narrow down the wide selection that will allow you to really do an educated choice. Anything from education to the genetic screening that's been done. Some people care about blood types and all that, whether or not there's any kind of scientific cases where that might have an effect, but people care about it. So there's a lot of information, but it's also good ways to filter. And then there's people who just call us and say, this is who I am, please help me select because this is overwhelming, and then we do that.
Yes, and I was thinking of that when you were talking about this multitude of filters and options, and I want to appreciate the work that it's been putting into creating such a detailed database.
Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned that you distribute worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Please tell us more about if there is any territorial limitation in selecting your donors or your recipients, and how do you deliver the product if your recipient is in a different country?
Sure. So our donors, as I said, we have labs in Seattle, Washington, and in Phoenix, Arizona. So both locations in the U.S. Luckily, both of those areas are very diverse as far as the populations go. We find we want to have as much diversity as we can. So at the time of when the donor was in our program, he lived in one of those two places. So that's where we pull our donors from currently. Pretty straightforward. They may live here for a period of time, or they may be born up and just grow up here and they're going to live here for the rest of their lives. That doesn't mean that they're natives of one of these two people, because people obviously move around a lot.
Right.
Secondly, as far as our clients, yes, worldwide, to the limits of where donor sperm is allowed and where it makes sense to ship it. So we work primarily in the United States, but we also distribute every month to Canada, to Europe, to Australia, to South Africa, to South America, including Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, very regularly. Other parts of Africa, it's more rare. We're starting to do more and more to Asia. It depends on what the imports and the regulation says. So, for example, Hong Kong and Singapore has tight restrictions, but it's possible. Japan is more difficult. China is currently impossible. So it really depends. Some countries simply do not allow for import of human tissue, period. And that makes it very simple to understand. We cannot do this as of now. I'm a firm believer that this will continue to grow, and people understand that there's a need for this. Mm-hmm. And it's more and more countries will most likely open up, especially with the open ID donors.
Right.
So right now we distribute to over 50 countries, and my guess is that will continue to grow.
Yes. And how do you ship to this over 50 countries?
We do ship everything from Seattle, Washington. We work with the shipping companies and the clinics and the patients directly, and the couriers and the customs in the different countries. Sometimes it's very strict and sometimes it's a little bit easier. But it literally goes in what's called dry shippers, which is essentially a steel tank that has absorbed liquid nitrogen, which I believe is the coldest liquid material that exists. So the sample can remain frozen for up to 3 weeks in one of these tanks. Usually doesn't take more than a few days worldwide. So shipping from Seattle to Australia is generally 3 to 4 business days. So you have a good, very good buffer there between the 3 to 4 days that it actually takes to up to the 3 weeks that the tank will remain frozen. It ships in these tanks, and there are sperm samples going in transit on airplanes every single day.
So the swimmers are flying sometimes.
Yes, the swimmers are flying.
That put an image in my mind. And speaking about swimmers, let's get our attention to donors. I learned from you when I met you that gay men are not qualified to donate sperm. Now that not only that personally I see it as a discrimination, but it also doesn't make any sense in my mind why that sample is not accepted, given the amount of detailed testing and screening that you guys do in order to accept that sample.
It doesn't make sense in my mind either, and I can give you the unfiltered version. You'll probably read between the lines. It doesn't take a lot to see where I stand on it. So we are subject to the FDA regulations here in the United States. They are the governing body of what we are allowed to do and not allowed to do, and they inspect us annually here in our lab, which is terrific. They're the ones that make sure that all the testing is done properly, that we follow the protocols, etc. So they actually do a very good job in making sure that infectious disease is not spread through a sperm donor. So that's good. Mm-hmm. And then in regards to the gay donors, so the FDA decided that, and this is, I believe this is all accurate, and it should be based on the regulations, but based in when there was an HIV outbreak back in the 70s, 80s, and all of a sudden the gay men were in a higher risk group of being HIV positive. Mm-hmm. While that might have been true then, that a higher percentage of HIV positive people were gay men, because of that, they put you cannot be a blood donor, you cannot be a sperm donor in the United States, period, if you're a gay man. The challenge there, the controversy, is that, of course, we test every single donor every 6 months or more. No sample can be released unless they have tested negative for HIV and many, 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 many other conditions. Regularly, we do that. Every sample is kept in quarantine after the donation to make sure that all the blood testing has been done. So we do 100% accurate job and double check everything there.
And this is where I don't understand why gay men cannot be donors, because you guys are testing that sample the same, regardless if the donor is a gay man or a straight man, right?
Yep. I don't care if you're in a risk group where 99% of the people would be HIV positive or mentally ill or whatever it is, because we test, and the HIV test is so accurate and so good that there is no error rate, period. So there's no risk. So that's really what it is. I honestly don't know if someone believes that there is a gay gene in the DNA that will make a donor, a baby conceived from a gay man, be more likely to be homosexual. I don't know. I don't think that there's anyone who would say that. I don't agree with it personally. I don't think that there should be such a restriction. But there currently is, and I don't know if any potential. I hope that there is a movement to where it will change. Personally, we have a lot of gay men who are applicants here because the homosexual community is in some places very, very strong, and there's a bond between gay men and gay women. Want to help gay couples, gay women to have a baby, and it's a wonderful thing to do this. They really can relate. I mean, gay men needs a surrogate when they want to have a baby, on their own.
Right.
It's unfortunate that there can't be that giving and helping someone else is not really possible for those people. So we are advocating for that rule to change. I think it's very controversial, and I think it's very unnecessary and sad that it's there. And, anyone who might listen to this, please try to help us to remove that.
Yes. And what do you do with those they find out they are gay late in life and maybe they already been your clients? Because there is no test to confirm if you are gay or not.
No, absolutely. No, I agree. And I mean, the question that we are forced to ask by the FDA is that if you've had male sex, then and if they say yes, they're automatically disqualified. That's the rules that we have to follow. Whether we agree with them or not, but those are part of the rules. So
right, there is this general assumption about how two gay men have sex, and also you could have a straight man that just want to experiment and have sex with another man, but that doesn't make him gay.
Absolutely, yeah. So that is really there's obviously no test for being homosexual or not, so there's no medical way to do that and determine that, but that is the question. Just like we ask them if they have traveled to certain countries. Have you been to a Zika country that is qualified, labeled as a Zika country, meaning that then have to be deferred. You cannot be a sperm donor because of the Zika virus. So if you've been to certain countries where there's an outbreak of Zika, you cannot be a donor. There's also testing now for Zika, so you can confirm that whether or not they're telling the truth. But in my opinion, it doesn't matter if they went to a Zika country. If they did not obtain or attract the Zika virus, it doesn't really matter where you've been.
Right. I hope that the right person is receiving this message and that the regulation will be changed because it's such a discrimination.
Yeah, absolutely.
The LGBTQ community needs to have exactly the same right and the same access to medical care and to any assisted reproductive treatments like everybody else.
Yes, and then what happens then in many cases is that the gay community, they talk to each other. So instead of going through a sperm bank, then the gay man will sign up to be, I'm going to be your personal sperm donor to the single woman or the lesbian couple. But that's a big problem, not only from all of a testing perspective. I mean, you need to test, you need to process, you need to do all that. But I think you could do some of that testing yourself, not nearly as
accurate
sophisticated as what we do. But the other bigger problem is that as a sperm donor, you have no rights and no obligations, or very few obligations. You are not the father. You don't have any right to see this child. You don't have to pay child support. You don't have to maintain a relationship with this child. The problem is, and we've seen live cases of this happening when a nice neighbor or a gay man is deciding to do this. Hey, I'm going to be your donor. I'm going to help you out. Well, when there's a beautiful little baby, 3 years later, there's a bond between the father or the donor, whatever you want to call him in that case, and the baby, and they say, hey, this is my child, and it is. You have the right to that child, and that's maybe a problem. That's not what the woman initially had in mind.
Right.
And then contrary, where the woman says, well, financial issues occurred, and now I need child support from that person, and you are the father. You owe me that in the United States and probably many other countries. You are forced to do that. And that's not what that nice gay man or not signed up for 3 years earlier when he said he was just going to do a good deed and help this person out who wanted desperate to have a child. So we take care of all that.
Thank you for bringing such a valid awareness.
We take care of all those, all the legal hoops and obligations and responsibilities. Don't use the friendliest friend or someone in your community. I would much rather advocate for, I don't care if you use another sperm bank than Seattle Sperm Bank, but don't use a friend. It is not going to end up well.
Same goes as don't borrow money for a friend. Better go to the bank. Because if something goes wrong, you don't want to mess up the relationship you have with your friend.
Yes, that's true.
And it's a valid point because going through a bank, not only that you know exactly what are you buying, giving all the medical history and all the screenings, but also they help you out with all the documents and all the paperwork. So the peace of mind that you gain from that, I don't know if you could put a value on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, also going back to what we talked about before is that with certain countries have the regulation of number of families and the offspring. In the United States, we self-select there, self-regulate there. There are cases where someone decides to be a sperm donor on their own and they don't stop at 1 or 2 or 20. I mean, it's just, you just don't know. All the unknowns, all the things that you sound good at the moment, they are not going to turn out well. So I think there's less of that now today when the actual sperm banking business and the egg banking business is regulated, it's working well, it's acceptable by most countries. You don't have as much of that kind of secondhand type of donation service, but it's still out there. And in many countries, it does exist. And I just can't, just encourage people to do it the real way if this is what you're looking for.
Right. 20 years ago, back in Romania, when I first time got married, the law was that the future husband and wife, they need to have x-rays and blood work. And I don't know if that is still the case these days, but it's definitely give you a peace of mind because if there is any major medical concerns, you will know about it.
Yeah.
So that was not the case when I got married in the United States. So I see how you could say that you get to have more information about your donor that you get to have about your husband, which is so valuable.
Well, I think it's very important. And the amount that we can talk a little bit about the genetic testing here, carrier screening as we refer to it. So we were the first sperm bank in the world that started doing carrier screening on all of our donors back in 2015.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Frederick. What is carrier screening? What that means?
What that means is really screening for a large number of genetic conditions that we could be a carrier of any kind of mutation of that.
Okay.
And there are, I don't know if it's tens of thousands or millions of different conditions, but we're all carriers of something. And right now, the testing companies are doing a terrific job in advancing the technology. So when we first started, there were about 4 different things we could test for. That was good enough testing, where the detection rates and the false positives and everything turned out to be good enough to do. And we expanded to 20 and then to 104. And as of this year, we're testing for 175 different conditions.
Wow.
And what that does, it says that the donor might be a carrier for any type of difference in that specific gene. And what that means is that if both parents have a condition that is the same, then there's an elevated risk of the child being born with this condition. All we're trying to do is to maximizing the positive outcomes of not having any kind of issues with this. So while we do that in sperm donors, and we don't necessarily eliminate the donor if he's a carrier of something that has a low risk of a minor condition. It could be a small setback in the hearing.
Okay.
It's the worst case scenario. Then it doesn't make sense to exclude an otherwise great donor. What we do is that we either require or encourage the mother to test themselves for the same thing. And as long as she is not a carrier of the exact same condition, there's no increased risk.
Okay.
And this is something that we've done in sperm donors now for over 3 years. But I would say that more and more couples who are not using a donor, they start doing this on a small scale. And I am all for that. It's relatively inexpensive. It's very accurate. It's quick. I tested myself doing it, and I was actually fortunate to not be a carrier of any of the conditions that this test would go for. But if I had been, my wife would have then tested herself, even retroactively, just because then you know the medical history. If your child gets sick, you know what might be the cause of this. So I think that is something that started in the sperm and egg banking industry. It's now really going to quickly, and it already has happened, really quickly starting to spread to the community in general, where you do this type of testing because it's really, really good and it's really easy.
Very interesting.
So I would say that 5 to 10 years from now, it may not be a requirement, but I still think that in developed countries, it will be a very high percentage of people that do this before they have a child.
That is incredible. And thank you for bringing this awareness, and especially for people that are considering sperm donors as option for them to create a family. Seems like the sperm bank is the safe option.
Absolutely, yes. The amount of testing that we can do and that we do is far beyond that of what the general population would do.
Okay. And how people can find you?
All of our information is on the website, which is seattlespermbank.com. The website is set up with a lot of information. I usually divide people into 2 different categories that has nothing to do with their relationship or sexual orientation or anything like that, but I call it the educated patients or the uneducated patients.
Okay. Tell us more.
Some people have been to a fertility clinic, seen a doctor, they've been doing all this trying on their own. They understand how this works. They're going to use the sperm donor. They come to us just to find that perfect donor for them. Mm-hmm. There's also the people who have no idea how this works. What does it cost? What is the process? Where are we going? I mean, they just have no idea. They just found out. It could be a heterosexual couple that's, oh my gosh, we've been trying to have children for 2-3 years, realized that it doesn't work with my husband, so we have to find a donor. Tons of information to both those types of groups of people. They can find everything there. I would say that depending where you are in the world, the rules will be a little bit different. The donors will not be differently screened or anything like that, because we treat every donor the same, regardless if he goes to Australia, UK, Canada, or stays in the United States. But the rules on the families and which donors might be available will differ.
Okay.
The other way to really look into how it works is to go to talk to your fertility clinic. If that fertility clinic has not heard about Seattle Sperm Bank, please let them know that we exist, because we are, I would say, a boutique-style sperm bank that puts quality above everything else, and we are very, very well known all over the world by clinics, and I think we work with all the best clinics out there, so we should be an option. And the clinics will then refer to their protocols and let them know how it works. In Australia, for example, many of the clinics, if not all, already work with us, and they have their own procedures in place on how you can access us. And then, of course, contacting us. We get daily contacts from all over the world, which is very exciting. You wake up in the morning at 7 o'clock and you have emails from all the time zones that are ahead of you, being Europe and Asia, and we both know that the U.S. and Australia time zone is a little bit tricky because we're hours behind and days ahead. But it's really just contact us via email. It's info@seattlespermbank.com. We will guide you in the right direction with direct questions. We'll guide you to the right people, fertility clinics or doctors.
So if I go see a clinic, do I get to choose your bank for my donors, or do I need to contact you directly?
Yes, either directly or indirectly. So in many of these countries that I've mentioned we work in, we either work with a distributor or we work directly with a clinic. So for example, if you're in the UK, we have a distributor. Essentially what they do is that they handle a lot of the regulations on behalf of us, but it's our donors that have been screened and tested and processed here. So sometimes you go through them and sometimes you go directly through us. But I hope that most countries and most clinics have heard about us. We have a very good reputation, and we really try to maintain and elevate that. So yes, there's a good chance that you can absolutely use one of our donors.
Fantastic. So we can find you at seattlespermbank.com.
Yes.
Or for more information, we can email you at info@seattlespermbank.com.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. I'm very appreciative of all the valuable information that you share with us today.
Very happy. I appreciate the time here, and I enjoy the conversation. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Redefine Family, a Spark Transformation podcast. Feel that your story could change someone's life. We invite you to spread the love by sharing our message with others. And leave your comments at spark@redefinedfamily.com. Until next time, remember that you are the spark in your life. Just shine bright.